gentlemen, welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Amy Nixon. Today is March 8th, 2023. Today we're going to be going through our team needs for picks 12 through 18 in the NFL draft. Then we're going to start our baseball preview. We're going to be covering the entire American League, Cy Young, MVP, playoff spots, all of it. And joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up?
What is up, everybody? Episode 154. We are, 3 days away from Selection Sunday. And the next time that you see us on a podcast, we will likely be breaking down the entire bracket and making our official Raw Prospect March Madness predictions, which will be a super fun episode. So be on the lookout for that. But today, we decided we start our baseball preview. You want to know why? Because Emmy and I have been doing this for long enough that we know how things work, and we're likely going to get caught up in March Madness, the NBA playoff pushing towards the playoffs. Of course, all the NFL stuff with free agency starting next week as well. And there's already been more signings for quarterbacks that we'll talk about sooner rather than later. And, we're pushing towards April, which means the NFL draft. We got to start on that. So we just know how things work out typically on this show. We get busy. We get distracted by other things. News items come up that we have to discuss on the show. And baseball can sometimes get lost in the shuffle. We're 3 weeks away, though, from the regular season starting, and we decided we'd just go ahead and get the American League out of the way to be safe. The National League will be sometime within the next 2 weeks. So with all that being said, we're going to kick it off with part 3 of our NFL Team Needs series, and we're basically addressing the last of the non-playoff teams from last year, the teams that missed the playoffs, in terms of the draft order. I believe it's picks 13 through 19. We will be addressing the Buccaneers who made the playoffs, but Emmy and I view the Buccaneers right now in a different category than the rest of the teams that made the playoffs last year, and we'll explain why later on. So let's just get it started with the New York Jets, who have the 13th pick, and we'll start with you.
Yeah, New York, the obvious team need being quarterback. That's the elephant in the room. All signs are pointing towards them bringing in Aaron Rodgers, possibly. Sauce Gardner even tweeted at Aaron Rodgers a few days ago. It just seems like it's bound to happen here in the next few weeks, which will be exciting. But it's not a done deal. So first and foremost, the number one need has to be quarterback. And then outside of that, I think you can go about bolstering the left tackle spot. I don't know where the health of Mekhi Becton currently is, but it doesn't seem like, based on how they viewed his playing time last season, it doesn't seem like Mekhi Becton is going to be someone they can trust moving forward, which is unfortunate because when he was on the field, he was pretty solid. But I think you can try to find an upgrade at left tackle. Outside of that, I think you look to free agency to fill some depth, particularly at I would say safety being one of the spots. But there's really not a whole lot of like major holes that are just glaring, other than the quarterback.
Yeah, the quarterback is the most glaring need for the Jets. We'll see what the future for Zach Wilson holds, but I think it's clear they're moving in another direction. It, it's going to be Aaron Rodgers, I think. I think it's just trending that way. That's what it feels like to me. If I were the Jets, though, I would want to make sure that Aaron Rodgers is in it to win it. Like, it seems to me that sometimes Aaron Rodgers, he's just a little aloof in terms of his personality from the way I see it. He doesn't always seem, and maybe this is just like a Green Bay thing. He's not, throughout his career, he hasn't been the greatest at working with younger players, younger weapons, which is what the Jets have right now. There are some questions on the offensive line. I'll talk about that in a second. I just I think the Jets clearly have a roster that's ready to contend for the playoffs, to make the playoffs. We've seen the past couple of years Aaron Rodgers not really show up to OTAs, not really do any off-season workouts with the team until training camp comes about. And so if I were the Jets before making that decision, I would just make sure that with the change in scenery, maybe a fresh start is what motivates him to really put in the work in the offseason to get on the same page with these young receivers and develop some rapport with his new teammates. That's just me if I were the Jets. But I do think it's trending in that way. They're going to have a new quarterback, and I think it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. And with all the, well, I won't even talk about that because the Tom Brady rumors will just sidetrack us even more. The Tom Brady to Miami rumors is the ones I'm talking about. I think the left tackle position for sure. I mean, you really don't know. And you really, even if he is, if you think he's healthy, I don't think you can totally rely on having a Mekhi Becton at the left tackle position. And then also Connor McGovern, who was your center last year, who some people would say has just kind of been a average to a little bit above average center in his time in the NFL, which is totally, I mean, fine. But I would look to maybe upgrade at the center position as well, given that Connor McGovern will probably want a little bit more money, if I had to guess, than they're willing to give up, especially if they bring in a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who is going to cost a pretty penny. And then definitely left tackle. I think that's somewhere you could look to in the draft or maybe even in free agency as well. And one thing about the Jets that I at least remember is once they lost Elijah Vera Tucker, and having him back will definitely help. But Elijah Tucker and Brees Hall, it just didn't seem like the run blocking was up to snuff. And they really lost some of that effectiveness to the running game. So I definitely sure up the center spot, the left tackle spot. And then I think, there aren't many holes on the defense. Obviously, you want to re-sign Keenan Williams on the interior defensive line. That should be a big priority. But I do think you could use to upgrade at the safety position and maybe even look to draft a linebacker. I think they could use some help on the inside part of their defense at the linebacker spot.
Okay, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Let's move on though. Our next team is the New England Patriots.
Right.
So I'll let you start off with this one.
Yeah, the Patriots are interesting. I think we go back to the offensive tackle position. If I have this right, Isaiah Wynn is a free agent. Marcus Cannon is a free agent. Connor McDermott is a free agent. Although I think they're all restricted. So whether you bring those guys back or you choose to make upgrades, I think, with Mac Jones, you could use to upgrade as According to Sports Info Solutions, the Patriots offensive tackles had a blown block rate on all plays this season of 3.4%, which was the 10th highest in the NFL. And the position group was called for 27 penalties. Um, Starting left tackle Trent Brown's 13 flags ranked tied for second most among all offensive linemen. Um, I mean, they had some injuries last year on the offensive line, but certainly I think they could use to upgrade there. I think wide receiver is obviously a big need. They've been chasing the holy grail there, searching for a number one guy for a couple years now. Um, I believe Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar are free agents. I know DeAndre Hopkins is a potential trade candidate. Um, there are some interesting options out there possibly for the Patriots, and then you obviously can address that through the draft. Um, and then after that, I think they're pretty good. You probably look at safety. Devin McCourty and Jabril Peppers are both free agents. But overall, that's what I had for the Patriots. Definitely receiver and offensive line. You could probably use to upgrade. But I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
For me with the Patriots, I'd say um, team speed is a big one. It seems like against teams like the Bills or the Chiefs, they just lack that top end speed at the cornerback position, at the wide receiver position, whatever the case may be. They just lack that throughout their entire roster. It got to the point where I believe on Thursday Night Football they had a screen pass to a cornerback, and that was the longest pass play they had all season up to that point. On a screen pass to a defensive player. That's how lackluster their speed was on the offensive side of the football. So receiver, but I think definitely address the speed aspect. You want a X wide receiver, of course, but get some guys with some speed. And then tackle, I look at Isaiah Wynn, like you said, is a free agent. I like obviously Trent Brown on the other side. He's solid, bringing him back. Um, but I think Isaiah Wynn signing him back has to be a priority. And if you don't sign him back, then you got to look to the draft, and that's probably where you would end up going with that 14th pick if you're not able to re-sign Isaiah Wynn. And then the third spot I look at is safety. Right now you have Kyle Duggar, Adrian Phillips, and then of course you have Devin McCourty, the longtime safety there, who's a free agent, and then Julius Peppers, who's also a free agent. So um, I look at safety and particularly the strong safety spot, a guy who can go down into the box and run support um, in a similar role to what Julius Peppers played last year. So someone to fill that spot, I think, would really do some good.
Okay. Moving on. Green Bay Packers. Where do you start with the Green Bay Packers?
I mean, oh man, it feels like very similar conversations every year with the Packers. Um, I'll start with defensive line. I think um, you drafted DeAndre Wyatt, like that's good, but I think they could use some more youth on the edge. I think having Rashawn Gary as your main pass rusher, like he's a top end pass rusher, absolutely. But I think having a guy on the other side, um, I think you could look to upgrade from what Preston Smith gave you last year. So I think you look at edge. That's a spot of need, and then the obvious one is safety. Darnell Savage was really up and down last year. He got benched midway through the season. He's been good at certain points in his career, so it's you know you can question maybe he'll regress back to the mean per se, and maybe get back to what he was the year prior. But I don't think you want to rely on that. Your other safeties, Adrian Amos, and I can't think of his first name, but his last name is Ford, who went in spots as a depth piece. Those guys are both free agents, so definitely the safety spot. That's a big need that I think they might look to address in the draft. And then I had wide receiver and tight end as needs again. I didn't want to start with those two positions because, like I said, it's the same conversation every year with the Green Bay Packers, it feels like. So I wanted to maybe switch it up just a little bit. But those two positions should still be the priority. Robert Tunyon is a free agent. 106 year old Mercedes Lewis is a free agent and is probably going to retire, but I don't know at this point. Dude's probably just going to play forever. But no matter the case, I think at the number Robert Tunyon is going to want, I think you could look to draft a tight end maybe in the third or fourth round and get better value at that position. Get similar production for far less money. I think that's something they could consider at the tight end spot specifically. And then the wide receiver spot, this team is in dire need of a slot receiver. Randall Cobb is, I mean, he's old. He's past his best days, to put it simply. And also, you just can't rely on him. He's been injured. Um, you know, for all the crap that Green Bay got for going out and getting Randall Cobb, he was good when he played, but like I said, you just can't rely on him. He's just past that point where you'd want to rely on him anyway. So I think you got to look in free agency and draft someone in the slot, or just um, draft a slot receiver. The Green Bay is really big on their receivers being 6 foot and taller, so maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba is a good fit. I don't know. He kind of fits their mold of being over 6 foot, but is also a slot receiver. So um, I think that would be a good candidate.
Yeah, I echo your sentiment. For me, safety is definitely an issue. And there have been arguments that you shouldn't, like, safety should not be one of your highest paid players in today's NFL, just because we've seen that model before and it hasn't worked to various extents for various teams that have tried it. So I think if you're the Packers sitting there at what, 15, that's an area where you start to think about maybe a Brian Branch from Alabama, or some of these safeties that could potentially go in the first round. That's how I would maybe potentially go about it. I'm not really familiar with the safety free agent market, but you mentioned it. Adrian Amos and Rudy Ford, uh, both of whom didn't really play all that well last year, along with Darnell Savage, who they've actually already guaranteed his fifth-year option, I believe. None of them played well. Two of them will be unrestricted free agents, the ones that I mentioned, as you said. Um, so definitely addressing the safety spot. You have your corners, I think, set in a pretty good spot right now. So if you address the safety spot, you'll be in a pretty good position. I think tight end in particular is a heavy need, and luckily for the Packers, in my opinion, from what I've seen, and I got to dive deeper into the draft here pretty soon. but this is one of the better tight end groups we've seen in a draft in a pretty long time. I mean, Michael Mayer, I believe is how you say his name, from Notre Dame. Darnell Washington, the absolute freak among the many aliens that are coming out of Georgia in today's NFL. There's a guy at Utah, I believe his name's Dalton Kincaid, who could potentially be a day two pick. I mean, this tight end, it's a deeper tight end draft than we typically see, in my opinion. And so I think you go out and you get one of those really good tight ends. And then edge rusher, Rashawn Gary coming off that horrible injury. The pass rush, of course, dropped off precipitously after his injury. And so even if he wasn't hurt and wasn't coming off an injury, I think you would still need to reinforce this position. But now, since he is, it's an even bigger issue. And so you want to ensure that you have your pass rushers going into the season. So we typically agree. I mean, you can always address receiver, but I went into last year really questioning the receiver spot. But I got to be honest with you. I really like Romeo Dobbs. I really like Christian Watson, who really came on at the end of the season. I think those guys, when the game slows down a little bit in their second year, now they might be playing with a different quarterback, but maybe that'll be good for them in that they might be playing with the quarterback that isn't quite as demanding as maybe an Aaron Rodgers is in game. I don't know. I'm just, I'm not saying this is like what it is, but I'm just voicing hypotheticals here. So I do think you can never have enough weapons, but if you get that really good pass catching tight end and you have Aaron Jones coming out of the backfield, I mean, I think you're pretty good there. So I think we generally echo each other's sentiment on the Packers, but they're an interesting conversation and will continue to be until this Aaron Rodgers situation sorts itself out. Let's move pretty swiftly here to the Washington Commanders, who I believe is our next team. Let me pull up my notes for Washington. Look, quarterback is there is a vacancy there. I'm not sure how it will be filled. You let Carson Wentz go. That experiment didn't really work out. That'll be an interesting. That's an interesting quarterback name I actually haven't thought of now that he's on the open market. What's the situation on Heineke? Is he still on the team? Is he a free agent? Do you know?
Heineke is a free agent, and they
Okay.
just cut Carson Wentz. So
Yes.
Sam
So
Howell is the current starter.
so maybe you go with Sam Howell. But in my opinion, I think you have a team that could contend for a wild card spot. And so I think you try to address that to the best of your ability. I think cornerback is an issue for sure, and then offensive tackle as well. But I'll let you go ahead and give your thoughts, and then we can move pretty swiftly here because we got a lot to get to.
Yeah. Definitely quarterback. That's an obvious one, but corner, you pointed that out. Corner is such a huge need for this team. Kyle Fuller was really good for them last year. Arguably a top, you know, 15, 20-ish corner, but the corner position is so deep that if you're, you know, top 50, you're a damn good player. So uh, then you have St. Just, and it kind of drops off a little bit. Bobby McCain, uh, you need some depth there. I think ideally you go four corners deep, and then you have maybe a safety that can play some man coverage. That's the ideal scenario. So they're two or three guys off from that, depending on how you look at it, how you view St. Just. But either way, I think you look to free agency, you look to the draft, and you have to find cornerback. And then last was offensive line on my list. Um, I like Sam Cosmi, tackle out of Texas. He was really solid last year. He really um, solidified himself as their long term starter, in my opinion. Um, and then I think the main thing is they have three starters locked in, um, Roulier, Leno, and Cosme. But the other two spots, I think you look to upgrade.
Okay. So let's introduce this next team. I'm interested to see who this one is.
Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay.
I'll let you handle this.
Well, so interestingly enough, another winning season, another above 500 season for Mike Tomlin. After, let's be honest, the first 8 games, it didn't look like that was going to happen, but it did. So this is an interesting offseason because I think that showed us with the continued growth of Kenny Pickett throughout the season and the continued growth of the offensive line and eventually healthy Najee Harris, the emergence of a guy like George Pickens, who I think is going to be a stud, a top 10, top 15 receiver in this league. Deontay Johnson, who continues to be a productive player, even though he had I think no touchdowns last year, which is one of the more stunning stats that I can remember because he's really good at getting separation and, for the most part, catching balls he's supposed to catch. Pratt Fryermuth obviously had to deal with some concussions last year, but he's a fantastic tight end, both in the run game and the pass game. He's a little bit. He's a more dynamic version of Heath Miller, just super reliable. Can do a little bit more from a run after the catch perspective. But let's get to the team needs. First, I would go out and address offensive tackle, particularly the left tackle spot, which is still a position of need, in my opinion, as a Steelers fan. Dan Moore Jr., the fourth-round pick out of A&M, who last year was the most maligned, most complained about position on the entire Steelers offensive line because last offseason they went out and they signed, some guys on the interior offensive line, and that really helped them there. But I think even if you're not going out to get a guy particularly to maybe take over for Dan Moore, which I think if you ask most Steelers fans, that's what they want, just because they want the instant upgrade. But you have to go get someone that's going to challenge for his spot, if not take it right away, because that's been a really weakness for the Steelers' offensive line. And you want to protect Kenny Pickett's blind side because, as we saw last season, he is on the smaller side. He's not Big Ben. And, he got hurt some last year because the Steelers just didn't block for whatever reason. So, I think go ahead and address the left tackle spot. Whether that's a depth move to potentially challenge Dan Moore or a guy to start right away. If it's a veteran like Orlando Brown Jr., who wasn't tagged by the Kansas City Chiefs, go ahead and do that. Cornerback is a huge need. We all know the Steelers have a good pass rush, and it masks some of their deficiencies on the back end. TJ Watt wasn't healthy for most of last year, but when he was on the field, this team won a lot of games because he just makes their pass rush as a collective that much better. But cornerback, Cam Sutton's a free agent. I'd like to bring him back. He was pretty solid. Probably their most consistent corner, start to finish. Levi Wallace, a guy they brought over from Buffalo, he was solid as a number 2 guy, and I would keep him as maybe like a depth piece. But you certainly want to address this corner spot. I think it's a spot at 17 that if one of these top corners is still on the board, you go ahead and look at that. If you're Pittsburgh, you really need to address it. I've heard Jalen Ramsey rumors as well. I'm not sure if that's actually going to happen. One thing you have to remember is it's a new regime in Pittsburgh. It's no longer Kevin Colbert as the GM. This is the first full year with Omar Khan, who was like the assistant GM to Kevin Colbert for a long time. So he knows what he's doing, but there could be different methods to the madness here. And then I think you have to address the interior spot on that defensive line. We all know Cam Hayward is still performing at a high level, uh, you know, which is pretty amazing considering he's getting up there in age. But regardless, Larry Ogunjobi, who they brought in on a 1-year deal as a free agent, I'd love to bring him back if possible. He was a pretty productive player. But Tyson Alualu, a guy that you could rely on a couple of years ago as one of your main guys up front, is no longer that guy after a couple injuries. So I would go out and get some depth at the interior defensive line spot. And then I think you could make the argument after those top 3 needs that they could use another middle linebacker. And it's pretty funny because you think the Steelers would have, of all positions, figured out the linebacker spot figured out, which they sort of do from a pass rushing standpoint, and that they have TJ Watt, they have Alex Highsmith, and they have Miles Jack, who I believe is a solid start to the middle linebacker position. But it's just whether or not, as a Steelers fan, you believe that Robert Spillane is good enough to be that other starter in this 3-4 defense, or if you think they need to upgrade at that other spot. And, there are some solid veteran options out there at the middle linebacker position. So that's the one other spot that, as a Steelers fan, I would say could use to be addressed.
Okay, yeah. You mentioned all 3 position groups that I had on my list. My top 3 was interior D line, cornerback, and linebacker. So interior D line, it's pretty self explanatory. Cam Hayward is getting up there in age, as you said. He's still performing at a extremely high level. Is still one of the top interior D linemen in the NFL. You have Larry Ogunjobi, who's a free agent. Wormley is a free agent as well. You could look to upgrade that depth. I think outside of Cam Hayward, I think the Steelers lack like a pass rushing type in the interior D line currently.
Right.
Like just being able to push the pocket from the interior that can help TJ Watt and uh what's his nuts?
Alex Highsmith.
Highsmith on the
Yeah.
on the edge there. Um Sorry about that. And then corner. Um Currently have Will Jackson, your current starter under contract, and then Cam Sutton, currently a free agent. I think you look to bring him back. That he's been really good for the Steelers, from what I've seen. Levi Wallace is solid, um, in my opinion, but I think you know you could look to upgrade definitely.
Absolutely.
And same with Witherspoon. I think either of those guys are definitely adequate, but not guys you want to be looking to have play a whole ton of snaps every game, if I in my opinion. And then the linebacker spot, it really just comes down to what are you getting from Miles Jack, and then outside of that, Devin Bush, he started off his rookie year pretty well from what I remember, and then since then he's just been a bit average, which is strange. Um, you touched on it a bit earlier, but I'd love to hear you like expand on this. I don't really know what has really kept him from having the breakout we all expected from Devin Bush.
Well, he had so his rookie year was great,
Mhm.
and it got Steelers fans really excited about like he could potentially be the next big thing at the middle linebacker position, sort of like James Farrier was. I'm not sure if you're too familiar
Mhm.
back in the Super Bowl days. Joey Porter. I mean, the list goes on and on. We all know the outside linebacker position, but he could potentially be the next great at the middle linebacker position for the Steelers. That got people really excited. And then at the beginning of um, his second year, he had the bad ACL injury that really just, for whatever reason, it just hasn't been the same since. Um, for a guy that was drafted primarily because of his speed and his sideline to sideline ability and his instincts and his ability to stuff the run, um, as a little bit of an undersized middle linebacker, in my opinion, but he had that speed and could pack a punch and could get sideline to sideline, which is really what the Steelers were looking for after losing out on Ryan Shazier to an unfortunate situation. It just hasn't been the same since that happened.
Right.
So, there's a lot of different things. I think some of it is mental with him. He's had some interesting run-ins with the media and just things that people that are not Steelers fans wouldn't necessarily know about. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I wish him well. He was a guy I really liked. I even got his jersey um, as like a Christmas gift because after his rookie year, I mean, that's how excited people were about him. And Pittsburgh, it's a little bit different than other places. We like the defense, um, So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. There's a new defensive coordinator, and obviously something that helped Devin Bush be a little bit better last year than he was the year prior to that when he was really bad for whatever reason. The year coming off the ACL. Um, was, I think, having the presence of Brian Flores. I think that really helped him. And now Brian Flores, obviously good for him, got the defensive coordinator job with the Minnesota Vikings.
Right.
So I'm just not sure it's a great fit anymore for Devin Bush. And that's unfortunate because he was a guy that the Steelers traded up to get. They went from number 20 to number 10, I believe, back in that draft to get Devin Bush because they were really missing and had a void there after losing Ryan Shazier. And it worked out for a minute, but then the injury really just changed things.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah, that'll do it for the Steelers. That was some pretty interesting conversation there. But let's move on to our last team for the day, and that is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The first playoff team we've covered, but they were under 500. That's worth noting, 100%. Um, I'll let you start off with this one.
You know, it's interesting because I think with Brady gone, it obviously leaves a void at the quarterback position. And this is where I want to actually flip it back to you to start because I talked a lot about Pittsburgh and I want to look at something. But the quarterback position is obviously interesting now that Brady is gone. The things that jump off to me right off the bat, right at the top of my head, getting younger on the offensive line obviously seems like something that I think they need to do. I think probably in this, I don't know. I'm not going to speak out of the back of my head. I want you to go first on this one.
Well, the elephant in the room in Tampa Bay is an obvious one. It's what are they going to do at quarterback? But I think the narrative around Tampa Bay the last couple of years has been, oh, they've had this incredible roster around Tom Brady. You know, great offensive line, great defense, great pass rush. It just really clicked, and then slowly, and slowly but surely, that great roster has deteriorated, and that's obviously what everybody feared, and it's come and gone now. This is going to be a pivotal offseason because Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy Bunting are both free agents at the cornerback position. So bringing one, if not both of them back, is going to be essential. But there's no question that they're entering a new era in Tampa Bay Buccaneers football. So whether they want to invest all of that money that's going to be needed in, you know, investing in both of these guys is going to be pretty interesting. And then the linebacker spot is also one where I think you could look to add some depth, and also um, Devin White is someone you could look to question just a little bit. I think um, there were certain points last year where you looked at what Devin White was doing, you go, wow, he's really struggling. I think particularly to that Thursday night football game against the Ravens where they lost. Um, that was one that was really strange, obviously, and Twitter caught on, and they were kind of piling on him. But I think Devin White is a spot where you look and maybe you bolster what's around him just so that you can put him in on, certain down and distances. That way you can really have him play to his strengths. So I think looking at the linebacker spot, I think that's something that they should consider, and also the fact that their superstar linebacker Levante David is also a free agent.
Yeah, I agree with you. Murphy Bunting and Jamel Dean obviously being free agents. You also have Mike Edwards, who is on the final year of his rookie deal as an expiring contract. Logan Ryan and Keanu Neal both served their 1 year deals. So right now, it's going to be key for them to bring Murphy Bunting and Dean back, but also get depth at that position. I think they could use to get a little bit younger there as well. Quarterback, right now, with Brady retiring and Blaine Gabbert obviously is a free agent, Kyle Trask is the only active quarterback on your roster right now. He's a guy that you drafted, I believe it was last
Second
year.
round,
Yeah,
second round year before last year, I think.
yeah, absolutely. Out of Florida. Um, you know, and this is what I worry about with the defensive head coaches in today's NFL is their sensibility with the offense. Um, and especially at the quarterback position. But I think Todd Bowles is a smart guy, and you know, I think we'll see what happens. It's an interesting market right now at the quarterback position. Do you believe that maybe possibly there is a in this division especially, even though the Saints just got Derek Carr and the Panthers will likely make an upgrade at their quarterback spot, that you could potentially be a player for another veteran guy to step in. Maybe you take on the one of these experiments at the quarterback position. I don't know. We'll see. Um, and then
The thought
outside
that oh,
linebacker.
sorry.
What were you gonna say?
The thought that's gone through my head a couple of times um, is the possibility of reuniting with Jameis Winston, but I know that's not going to happen. I just found it kind of amusing.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, who knows? In today's NFL, nothing will surprise me. Um, and then obviously, outside linebacker or an edge could obviously be a need. So, um, yeah, I think that's going to do it for that. Is there anything else that stands out to you from that group of teams? that we need to address, or can we move on?
Um, well, I think Tampa Bay looks to be maybe the biggest faller out of these teams we talked about today. Out of these teams, the overall feeling is positive, and the feeling is that we missed the playoffs this year, but we'll be back in the mix next year. But for Tampa Bay, it was like we made the playoffs and we just lost our Hall of Fame go quarterback Tom Brady, and now we're kind of fucked. So it's sorry for my language, but it's just not a similar feeling to a lot of these other teams we talked about.
The one difference, though, is that as opposed to the other teams that we talked about, if you're Tampa Bay, you at least have a Super Bowl ring from a couple of years ago that you can sort of still cling
Hang your
to,
hat on, right?
hang your hat on as you go through sort of a mini retool or rebuild, so to speak.
Right.
And your division, even though the quarterbacks will probably be better than we think they will be with Derek Carr going to the Saints, the Panthers making an obvious upgrade there, whether that's through the draft or in free agency. It's still no sure thing that the division is locked up by any one team. So, um, injuries happen, that sort of thing. So maybe you are in a position to end up competing again for the division, as crazy as that sounds. But with that, we'll move on. Where do we start? I guess I'll introduce our next topic.
Yeah.
3 weeks from opening day, baseball is almost here. Spring training's been going here for a couple weeks. And today we just thought we would open up by previewing the American League. Because the next couple weeks are going to be really busy and you never know what may happen, and baseball could get squeezed out of the equation in some respects. But if we start now, we'll ensure that doesn't happen. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to talk about division winners, who we think will win each division. We'll talk about our projected wild card teams, and then we'll talk about some awards. That's the basis of the show or of the segment. I want to get a
Yep.
feel for your division winners. For me, let's just mention our division winners, and then we can open up the conversation, so to speak. For me, I have the Astros winning the AL West. I have the Guardians, once again, winning the AL Central, even though I think the Twins could challenge them for that spot. And then I have the New York Yankees winning the AL East. What do you got?
Um, I had the Astros winning the AL West. The Twins winning the AL Central. Um, you're not gonna like this one. I had the Toronto Blue Jays
Okay.
winning the AL East. But the AL East is going to be a bloodbath if things play out the way I see them going. So I just see the AL East kind of obviously teams aren't playing their division as much this year. They changed the schedule a little bit in that way, but I still do think that those teams are going to kind of eat at each other in terms of um, record compared to, say, the AL Central, where you have two good teams and then three kind of teams.
Well, okay. Let's open up the conversation a little bit then. Um, let's real quick address the Houston Astros, and then we can get into the spots that we somewhat see differently. From the Astros perspective, you lose Justin Verlander, right? But other than that, you bring in help at a position that I think you could really use help. Going into the offseason, there was one of the weaker spots on the team. and that was with an aging Luger Scurriel Jr. Um, you know, you could have used, or not Ludris. I got the wrong Gurriel. It was Yuli Gurriel Jr.
Right.
Um, you could have used to upgrade at the first base position, and they got a former MVP, AL MVP, and Jose Abreu from unsigned in free agency from the Chicago White Sox. You made an upgrade there. You still have a really deep pitching staff. Guys like Framber Valdez, Lance McCullers Jr.'s will now be going through a full healthy season. You know, Luis, what is his name? Uh, Shoot, I'm blanking on his name. Um, but I mean, you have a deep pitching staff, and you still have your core guys. And Jeremy Pena, the young rookie shortstop, who was one of the stories of the playoffs last year, I believe will take another step. And you just insert another MVP into your lineup. Dusty Baker is a fantastic manager. I think the Mariners improved, but on the margins. It wasn't anything drastic to where I think they could put themselves in a place where they could automatically be contending with the Astros for the division. And I think, outside of the Mariners in your division, there are no sure things. Texas is a team that's trying to win, but they're really top heavy. If you look at where they're allocating their money, they're just trying to acquire talent to at least be like a competitive team that could maybe be in a wild card position, which is drastically better. And it's good for baseball considering where they have been, which is in a position with basically void of talent and one of the worst teams in the American League here for the past half decade. So I think that's good. And the Angels obviously have their fair share of household names. And if those guys stay healthy for a full season, they've added some pitching to where they could maybe be around a 500 ball club, possibly contending for a wild card spot if things go right. And then you obviously have the Athletics, who are one of the worst teams in the American League. But you kind of see where I'm going is that I don't see a scenario, even if you think the Astros got marginally worse because they lost the Cy Young Award winner in Justin Verlander. I don't think it's enough to where you can say that they aren't going to win this division, as they've proven the past, every single year almost.
Right, right. I 100% agree with you. I think the interesting conversation has to be with the Mariners because um, the question with the Mariners has always been about their ability to produce enough offense, and they improved on that marginally. But the question is whether it will be enough. Um, their pitching staff is still fantastic. They're deep. The problem just remains the same, and I think this time around, I think it will be a little bit tougher to find yourself in the wild card spots, in my opinion. But we'll get to that a little bit later.
Okay. So let's move to the AL Central, where I have the Guardians and you have the Twins. Why don't you? And I can see where you're coming from, but why don't you explain your reasoning as to why you have the Twins over the Cleveland Guardians?
Um, to me, the Twins, they were battling with the Guardians for the first half of last year, if you remember, and then the second half of the year, the injury started to hit really hard, and they had the third worst record in the AL the second half of the season. So, um, really, it just comes down to um, they bolstered their lineup, they improved their pitching staff, they were able to bring back Carlos Correa, and now you have a reset season. Everybody's healthy. I think um, there's just a bit of positive energy within that organization that will kind of help them. But at the end of the day, it's just going to be a coin flip in this division, in my opinion. It's just going to be a battle between the Twins and the Guardians from beginning to end. So um, it's definitely not a sure thing, and I could definitely see it going the other way as well.
I think these teams are going to be neck and neck for most of the season. Um, and the question to me is like, do either of these teams reach the 90 win mark? Obviously, the Guardians exceeded that, winning 92 games last year. And they were really, they, despite their lack of said, star power, they really pushed the Yankees, if you remember, in that divisional series. Um, they're a pesky team, and they added Josh Bell as sort of a guy who can give them a little bit of pop, a guy who's bounced around the league from Washington to some other places, San Diego with the Padres as well, as a guy as, a productive DH that isn't necessarily going to give you the highest bat to ball contact rate that you're necessarily looking for. But I think he complements the Guardians lineup well because they already have a lot of guys that do that very well. They were one of the better teams at making contact and putting the ball in play last year. That's what they do. They have speed. They can run the bases. They can steal. They just have different ways to manufacture offense, in my opinion. They found ways to do it with another year under the belt for the young players, like a Stephen Kwan, who was an absolute star last year, an emerging star, and a pain in the ass in the playoffs for the Yankees to deal with. Um, and with some of these other guys that they have, a Jose Ramirez, who's a former MVP, who can still give you the pop, but also put up the MVP numbers that you're looking for and play a gold glove level of defense at third base. And then adding in, Josh Bell, a guy who's going to hit 25, 30 homers, I think, if he's healthy, along with Mike Zunino, a really good veteran catcher who's been one of the better power hitting catchers that we've seen the past decade in baseball, reaching about 30 homers for the Rays last year. I just like the way that their lineup complements each other now. It it's it's a mix of contact, a lot of contact, and now some guys that if you have two guys on base can pop a 3-run homer. Like they can run into a 3-run homer every once in a while. And that's something I think they were lacking last year. So I like the mix of pop and contact, which is why I think that even if they don't improve on their win total, it'll still give them enough of an offensive improvement, at least on the margins, to have them in the running to win this division. And I think their pitching depth is where they sort of separate themselves from the Twins, especially in the bullpen. But I could see where you're coming from in that the Twins did trade for Pablo Lopez from the Mariners, who also have a lot of pitching depth, and he was their ace. So, and they made some other moves at the pitching position to get better there, which they really needed to because pitching has been a problem in Minnesota for years now. It's really why they haven't been able to really have all that much success when they get to the playoffs, is because they don't have the necessary pitching to do well in the playoffs. They've always been a decent offensive team. I mean, they've had hitters, they've usually been a pretty good power hitting team, and I love that they got Correa back. I think that's good for baseball that he didn't end up going to the Mets or the Giants for that
Or
matter.
just really any big market.
Um, I think it's really good that he stayed in Minnesota after throughout the season last year saying out loud multiple times that he wanted to stay in Minnesota. And maybe all of that free agency stuff that happened was just like an ultimate script. um, I don't know, but it seemed for a minute there that money talks, and After the Giants missed out on Judge, they were desperate for a big name. They didn't end up getting it. And for whatever reason, those teams were both skeptical about the same injury issue or the same health issue that sort of brings up questions for me about
Oh,
Carlos Correa.
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
think, go ahead.
I looked a little bit deeper into it, and that ankle injury was one that he had suffered before he entered the MLB, and had apparently gotten worse and worse and worse. So his ankle is um, unstable, apparently, according to those two teams, and that's why he had failed those physicals. And then the Twins just ended up giving him less money because of it. So he went back to the Twins on less money, but it ends up helping the Twins in the end, I guess, because he's still, when he's on the field, of course, one of the best sluggers in baseball.
Yeah, and he's also one of the more big time players in baseball. When it matters the most, that guy's going to come up big, which I think is awesome for the Twins. Here's what I'm going to
Right.
say about the Twins. I have a question about the depth in their bullpen, but I think it's gotten better. I think it'll be better this year. Their pitching will definitely be better. Will it be good enough to contend with the teams like the Guardians, who I believe have the most depth in this division at the pitching position, with an ace like an established ace in Shane Bieber and a guy in Isaiah McKenzie who's just an absolute stud? I'm not sure, but I do think their pitching will be at least good enough to keep them in the playoff race. And they're a team that I could potentially have in a wild card spot later on in the episode. So I'm not like bashing the Twins by any stretch of the imagination. I think these teams will be neck and neck. But my biggest question comes with whether or not Byron Buxton, who is their star center fielder and who they really, really need, I believe, to be a real successful offense this year, because Buxton and Correa together could be one of the better 1-2 punches in baseball. If they have those two guys healthy, I mean, they definitely will have the offense to get wherever they want to go. But he just hasn't proven that he can stay healthy. And so we'll see where that goes. But I think that'll wrap it up for that conversation. That's my only real questions with the Twins. This is the most
Yeah.
probably. Go ahead.
Um, my prediction mainly comes down to the luck flipping at the end of the day. I think if you look roster wise, I think the Guardians probably have the better overall roster. I just think in baseball, it's really hard to be good season over season, and I just kind of look at it and see, like, the Twins had awfully bad luck last season, and then maybe the luck will flip this time around. I don't
And
know.
that's totally fair. That is totally fair. And regardless, again, I think they'll be neck and neck for
Right.
most of the year. Um, we're just viewing it from two different lenses. Um, this will probably be the most interesting and most important conversation that we'll have in this segment. And that is the AL East, the best division, top to bottom in the American League. I don't think it's. You could have made the argument a couple of years ago it was the best division in all of baseball. I don't think it is anymore, considering that the NL East is just, oh my God. I mean, the Mets,
Ridiculous.
the Braves,
Ridiculous.
and the Phillies. I mean, holy hell. But and we'll talk about that on our NL preview. Um where I can see where you're coming from with the Blue Jays. And I think this is really, when I look at it from sort of a coastal elitist baseball perspective, which I don't really want to be, but I sort of am now. I think this will end up being a battle between the Blue Jays and the Yankees for the division race. Um, I just want to get your quick thoughts. Where do you think, like, where's the difference here that you have in your mind that makes the Blue Jays take the division?
Um, to me, I just look at the Yankees lineup, and I think overall, the talent is there absolutely, but you look at the last few years, um, a lot of the guys in that lineup have had injury troubles and hitting droughts as well. So, um, to me, for the Yankees, it really comes down to hitting consistency. We know the defense is going to be there. We know the pitching is going to be there. There's questions about there being a closer, but I don't think that will really matter because their bullpen is really good. But um, to me, the difference is just in the um, not the star power. The Yankees 100% of the star power. It's more so the hitting consistency, in my opinion. And I think, you know, I don't know how much age plays a factor in me being biased against the Yankees, but um, that is one of the things I thought of when looking at their lineup. It did feel like a lineup that is a bit older, in my opinion, and I kind of questioned their durability in a sense.
Okay. Um, so what is it that you really like about the Blue Jays? Because I really like the Blue Jays as well. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't like the Blue Jays. I think they're a really, really good team, and they're going to be hell of scary for a lot of teams to face. I think they got there. We all remember last year with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. coming out and say, last year was the trailer, this year is the movie. And that really backfired on him in a sense.
Yeah,
Um,
it did.
this year, he said he's not going to say anything because he saw what last year did, and he got a lot of social media pushback, and some guys that were roasting him on social media. Once the Blue Jays ended up getting, I believe it was swept out of the playoffs by the Seattle Mariners. Um, so just real fast, what do you like about this? Has nothing to do with the Yankees. What do you like about the Blue Jays in particular?
Well, to me, it comes down to the Blue Jays had a glaring weakness, that being team defense, and they addressed it. They picked up a lot of interior, or not interior, infielders. I don't know why I had trouble figuring that out. They picked up a lot of infielders to bolster up that defense, and I think that's the main thing they had to address is team defense. They got obviously absolutely diced up by the Mariners, particularly in that game. They were up 8-1 or whatever it was. So I think they've had the battle scars. We talked about that in the NBA a little bit. I think having the battle scars helps for a young team. I think Bo Bichette coming back, Vlad Guerrero Jr. coming back healthy. I think this team is just set to take the next step. With that being said, though, I think, in my opinion, I think this division is a three-way fight, because I have the Rays in the mix as well. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that because I had the Rays a little bit higher than maybe what you had. Um,
Well, I think the Rays are certainly I'm not going to say it yet, but they could be one of my wild card teams. They've proven year in, year out that they are. Kevin Cash, I believe, is a top three manager in the entire major leagues. Um, they always find a way to pitch, and they have depth at that position. So they're going to be fine at the pitching position. And from a lineup perspective, they did some interest. They made a couple interesting moves. But, you know, to me, for the Rays, it's all going to depend on you're going to need more from the guys that you really depended on last year and just weren't able to get that consistency from. Randy Arozarena is a guy that was hurt some. They had some bad injury luck. So, of course, there's room for some positive regression here. And he still made the playoffs. But, we'll talk about the Rays when I get to the wild card. Okay. For me,
Right.
it's just about here's what I look at, right? Right now, you're going to play 13 games against your division instead of 19 games against your division. And some people would say that's a good thing for the Yankees. Some people, including myself, though, would say that might be an advantage for the Blue Jays. We don't know, though, because we can't really count on that being a factor because we just haven't seen the schedule yet. It's a balanced schedule. You're playing every single team, and we're just not entirely sure of what's going to happen yet. But for me, with the Yankees, it's just I think Garrett Cole, who has been top 10 in Cy Young every year he's been with the Yankees, um, along with Carlos Rodon, who's a guy that's actually been one of the best pitchers in the entire major leagues the past 2 seasons while he was in San Francisco. And there might be a little bit of negative regression because San Francisco is a little bit of a pitcher's ballpark, so to speak, while Yankee Stadium is, with the short porch and right, there is some potential for a couple, short porch, cheap homers, so to speak. So I think you might not see like the crazy numbers that you've seen from Carlos Rodon the past couple of years, but I do think there is a significant difference between having Garrett Cole and Carlos Rodon atop your rotation than having Garrett Cole and Nestor Cortez, who has been fantastic for the Yankees. But as your number two, matching up with the Astros, matching up with a lot of these other teams that you got to face nowadays in baseball, I like Nestor Cortez as a number 3 better than I like him as a number 2. And so Carlos Rodon, a guy who's had a 2.67 ERA and a 33.9% strikeout rate the past 2 years with the San Francisco Giants, has been an NL Cy Young candidate year in, year out. Pairing him with Garrett Cole, this is something the Yankees haven't had since they had like CC Sabathia, and you have to go all the way back to like the Andy Pettit and those days, to where they had the starting pitching depth that they have now. And it makes all the difference. We've seen it time and time again come, the playoffs especially. I think they've closed the gap in particular with the Astros from a starting pitching perspective, because just having Carlos Rodon, it bumps everyone down a spot. Nestor Cortez is now your 3, who's been one of the better pitchers in the American League for the past year and a half. You have Luis Severino as your 4. And then you have either a Domingo Germán or a Clark Schmidt, a younger guy that I really like, that not a lot of casual baseball fans will know until the year starts. So, and Domingo Germán is a guy who has been a really good pitcher in the major leagues, especially as a number 5 starter. So this is the starting rotation to me is where it makes all the difference. But I think adding Carlos Rodon and shoring up the bullpen to where I think Aroldis Chapman is sort of at this point in his career addition by subtraction. Chad Green, who actually went to the Blue Jays, I still think can get it done, but I think adding Tommy Kahnle, just the versatility they have in their bullpen, top to bottom, it's going to be one of the better bullpens in the entire American League if it stays healthy. And then for the Yankees, this was an offseason that could have easily gone wrong in many, many ways. If you lost Judge, it would have been disastrous. They re-signed Judge. Rizzo is a guy who has, been really, really productive as a Yankee. And they got him back. So you have the defense at first base. The two questions from a lineup standpoint are at third base with Donaldson, right? Josh Donaldson, who is an aging player, but still provided really good defense over there. He just didn't hit at all. And despite all that, you still won 99 games. And then left field is a position where you didn't really have much production. Aaron Hicks is a guy that a lot of people aren't sold on, but you have some young prospects that are coming up that I believe in because I've seen them in spring training. And I think you're going to have a young shortstop that'll be better defensively than whoever the shortstop was last year. Not even going to say his name. And then, I just believe that Stanton didn't have the best of years last year. I think he's in for a bounce back year. And I believe that having DJ LeMahieu healthy for the first time in, a couple years, because he's been dealing with a back injury, a toe injury, that's huge. He hasn't been the same guy. And he looks good to me in spring training. I think having him back at that leadoff spot will be huge for the Yankees as sort of a contact bat to add to this lineup. And then I just think that Gleyber Torres is a guy that hit 24 home runs this year. I think banning the shift is going to help the Yankees a little bit. I think it will help all teams, but I think it will help the Yankees more so than maybe others. But maybe that's just my perspective on it. I could talk all day about this. But here's what I'll say. I think it's going to be a situation where now with the balanced schedule, it's going to be like the Yankees might regress from despite I think having a better team because of their pitching, I think it might regress to where you have a situation to where the Yankees win 95, 96 games and the Blue Jays are right there at 93, 94 wins. I mean, I'd have it really close. But I'll tell you what, here's what we're going to do. Since this is taking way longer than I thought. We're going to wrap up this conversation up with the wild card teams. And then some point later on before the baseball season, we'll talk about our AL award candidates. Just because I don't want this to go on to the 2 hour mark. And it's already close to 1 a.m. So let's move on. I'm pretty sure we both understand each other's perspectives on that. Let's talk about the wild card teams. Who do you have as your AL wild card teams?
For me, I had the Yankees at 4, the Cleveland Guardians at 5, and then the Tampa Bay Rays at 6.
Okay. For me, I have the Toronto Blue Jays at 4. I have the Seattle Mariners at 5. And then for me, it came down to either the Twins or the Rays for the last spot. And I'm going to give it to the Rays. So those were my 3. So for me, real fast, I think the Blue Jays are an obvious playoff team, whether they win the division or not. You add Chris Bassett to your rotation, who was the number 3 guy with the Mets last year and was really good when he was healthy. You trade away Teoscar Hernandez, but you shore up your defense in some spots, which I think will help. Bo Bichette, hopefully being healthy for a full season. I mean, he's been really, really good when he was healthy. He really hit at the end of last year. Just didn't have the necessary help. George Springer, I think, needs to stay healthy for more than he has. But when he's been on the field, he's been really good. And then, obviously, Vlad Guerrero Jr. could be an AL MVP candidate pretty easily, as we saw 2 years ago. So, yeah, I think you improve marginally your rotation, and you improve defensively. So I like that for the Blue Jays, and I think they'll be right up there fighting with the Yankees all season long. Um, you know, the Rays are an interesting team because you just don't really know with the Rays. They're going to raise you. There's a saying in baseball, the Rays are going to raise. I mean, it's just they're going to do what they do. They're going to find unheralded pitching prospects. They're going to bring them up. They're going to develop their pitching from an internal standpoint. And they have guys like Frierson and uh, some other guys that just throw hard and they know how to pitch. And Kevin Cash is one of the better managers in baseball. I think Wander Franco is a guy to watch for the Rays. They're young shortstop who they just paid a lot of money, but I think it's worth it. He's a guy that could turn into like the next star at the shortstop position. And if he does, and you have good production from Randy Arozarena, and you have that contact bat and Yandy Diaz at the top of your lineup, you're set. So I do believe in the Rays as like a 90-ish win team, right around there. They're going to hit for contact. They're going to pitch, and they're going to win those lower scoring games and just be a pest all season long. And then the Mariners are an interesting team. To me, though, they were sort of on the low key this offseason. But I think bringing in Colton Wong, a really good second baseman from the St. Louis Cardinals, a contact bat, a veteran presence will be good for them. You also upgrade in your outfield, getting Teoscar Hernandez from the Toronto Blue Jays as a guy that's been really good the past couple of years, both defensively and offensively. He's definitely an upgrade over Mitch Haniger. And then I think you have a guy in Julio Rodriguez who could possibly contend for AL MVP. He's another one of those guys. So, yeah, I think I'm just higher on the Mariners than maybe some people are. I like their pitching depth with Gilbert and some of the other guys, Luis Castillo, who they acquired at the trade deadline. They're going to have a full season of him now. I really like that. And I love that some of the guys that they have in their bullpen, Seabold, some other guys that are just really, really good. I favor them in a couple spots over the Twins, but that's where I'm coming from. But I'd be interested to hear your perspective, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, for me, it was really splitting hairs for that last wild card spot. Um, and I think going with the Rays, it just felt like um, they were the team that you can count on. I guess, but they've just been so consistent the last few years, and they're the hallmark of small market success in the MLB, and I don't really see that changing. Um, they they bring back a pitcher. I can't think of his name. He's been injured the past 2 years,
Oh,
I think.
damn! I didn't
Um,
even mention him. So,
Glass
um,
now,
yeah,
Tyler
Tyler
Glass now.
Glasnow. Yep. Keep
Yeah,
going.
so they bring him back. That feels like a free agent pickup almost.
Yep.
Um, and then they also signed uh, Wander Franco,
Yep.
who's a prospect that a lot of people really like, who's I think only 21, 22 years old. So um, I just think the Rays, with how good their pitching will be, I think this time around with their lineup, hopefully healthy for the most part, this year will go a bit better on the offensive side of things.
Absolutely. So we obviously are going to wrap things up here in the next 5-10 minutes, but um, is there any interesting conversations that we could wrap this thing up with in terms of the AL? We have now, by the way, on any of these upcoming episodes where we talk about baseball, you are eligible to change your prediction if you want to up until the season starts. I'll make that a rule. So if you happen to change your mind on the uh, one of these spots, you can absolutely voice that on the podcast. And in the comments, tell us what you think. What are your predictions? Uh, and I'm sure we'll have some fun stuff in terms of like future bets and World Series picks on our next baseball segment. But I think the most interesting thing to me, the obviously as a baseball, a more like plugged in baseball fan than most. Obviously, you're still getting yourself into it, but I think this Shohei Ohtani story and the World Baseball Classic, which, if you're not familiar, is actually going on right now. It's basically like a World Cup for baseball that's supposed to happen every 4 years, um, where actually the major league players, because a lot of these major league players are from different countries. It's different than a lot of other sports. Some are from the Dominican. You have guys from Cuba. I mean, you have guys. Xander Bogaerts, the star shortstop now for the San Diego Padres, formerly of the Boston Red Sox. Is playing for the Netherlands. So it's very interesting to me, the World Baseball Classic that's going on right now. And you look at the U.S., they're just absolutely stacked with guys like Trout and Ohtani. And I mean, actually, no, Ohtani's playing for
Yeah,
Japan. I
Tona's
take
from
that back.
Japan, right? Okay.
Yeah, Ohtani's Japan. But uh, you look at the AL, it's just insane. I believe they have Pete Alonso, the guy from the Mets. It's just fantastic. I think this World Baseball Classic may be something interesting that we do a mini Patreon segment on, or um, talk about on our next baseball episode, because I just find it interesting that so many of these star major leaguers are playing in this right before the season starts. And it's sort of similar
Right.
to a World Cup format where you have the pool stage, and then you go into, a tournament style bracket. So that's just my parting shot. Is I think if you the games, I mean, they're being played in different countries, so the times are thrown off. But if you get a chance to maybe tune into one or two of these games, it could be really interesting.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Um I've looked into the American roster, and then the roster from I believe it's Puerto Rico, I think. Um I mean, their rosters are so stacked. It's unbelievable. So definitely interesting conversations to be had with that. But I think the one I wanted to bring up um, was just the conversation of which team do you see as having the potential to make, you know, one or two moves at the deadline that could put them over the top. We've seen that the last 2 years. Maybe not as much last year, but you could make the argument that the Phillies did have that same kind of route as well, getting hot after the deadline. But the deadline is becoming more and more important. So, who do you think is a possible team who could make a move at the deadline that could push them to front runner status or contender status?
And by contender status, you're talking about for the World Series.
Yes.
Okay, well, that changes things a bit, because if we're just talking about on the fringes, going to the playoffs, and potentially making some noise in the playoffs, I had a different answer prepared for that. But this is a great question. Um, for me, I think it's the Mariners.
Interesting.
Um, and it's interesting because they sort of kind of made that move last trade deadline when they got Luis Castillo.
Hmm.
But I think that was the move to elevate them to the playoffs and to the
Right.
point where they're going to be in the playoffs consistently. I think they still could use more to get them over the top. Now, what specifically that is, I couldn't honestly really tell you right now, but they just feel like a team that with another piece offensively, like another big piece offensively, could potentially be a team that gets hot after the deadline. A lot of their young players come together and they make a run. Um, it's tough in the
Yeah.
American League
Yeah.
because, I mean, if you want to do it, you have to prove that you can not only beat the Yankees, but beat the Astros as well.
Right. Which is it's a mountain that many teams have tried and failed to climb. So it'll be interesting to see if one of those teams get knocked off. I don't foresee it really happening, but that'll do it for this episode. I'll let you wrap it up with anything else you wanted to say, but definitely leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, um, and as Michael said before, leave a comment, and even if you're not really a baseball guy, if you're more of an NFL or NBA guy, um, just leave what you're thinking down in the comments, whether it be your NBA, your favorite NBA team lost tonight or won tonight. Give your thoughts on that as well. We want more fan engagement, and we're gonna do what we can to make it worthwhile for watching us. So
Absolutely. We're always looking for ways to improve. Tonight was a good episode. Um, I didn't even think I was as sharp as I should have been on my baseball stuff. And that will change for the National League preview. And we still have some more things to talk about from an AL perspective as well. So, but in terms of the near future, um, Tuesday or Wednesday, if I had to guess, because the first four, I believe, starts Thursday, a week from today, actually, since it's Thursday, March 9th at 1 a.m. Um, we have Selection Sunday on Sunday, and then we have the first four games, which are sort of like they count as NCAA tournament games, but they're in Dayton, Ohio, and they're teams that have to play themselves into the actual 64 team bracket. Um, that happens on Thursday. So Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday, we'll be doing our first ever actual. We've done it for conference tournaments, and we've done it for like the Sweet 16 brackets, right? Which is fun, but it's not really the most fun because the most fun part to me, and I'm a college basketball nerd, so I like all of it, but the most fun part to me and for casual fans is picking who you think the upsets are going to be in the first two rounds of the tournament. Who's going to be the Cinderella team, the Florida Gulf Coast, the St. Peter's, the who was the team that made a run a couple years ago that I'm blanking on? Um,
um, um
they were like a
Loyola
15.
Chicago. Loyola Chicago.
Yeah, Loyola Chicago, but there was another one.
Right.
Maybe I'll get back to you on our next episode. But yes, we'll be doing that. We'll be going through each region of the bracket, giving you guys our predictions, some like real analysis on teams that we actually think could obviously make the Final Four and win the national championship. Real analysis on other teams, but also just some wild upset picks, most likely.
Right.
It's so interesting to me every year how the bracket ends up and who get teams that get obviously harder draws than others. So it's an exciting time. We'll be doing that. And then we'll likely have another episode sooner rather than later where we do other stuff too. So be on the lookout for all that. Leave your comments, your likes, your reviews. It helps us all. We greatly appreciate you guys. And we'll see you on the flip side. So I guess with all that being said, for episode 154, for my co-host who's still getting into baseball but is getting a lot better talking about it, and for myself, the resident Yankees fan on the Raw Prospect podcast, just like the San Francisco Giants' chances of signing Aaron Judge but ending up signing Arson Judge, we are gone. Peace out.
Peace.
That's a reference
Oh,
to the offseason
Arson
that
Judge.
many of y'all will have to look up. Arson
Okay,
Judge.
gotcha. Peace out.